Alrighty, let's do some review. That'll be fun. One thing I want you to think about for the quiz is it's going to tell you to have exact answers. It's going to tell you not to use decimals. In fact, it's going to be like this: no decimals. And then it's going to have big, giant letters, and it's going to be bold and underlined with exclamation points. So I recommend no decimals, meaning you have to simplify it. You're going to be using your yellow card. Pay attention to the specific thing you're doing. We learned several different things, and I don't want you to get confused. So this does not have any negative under the radical, so don't put I in your answer. Just go to your yellow card, look for the biggest perfect square. That goes into 24. The only option that has a perfect square in it is 4 and 6. The reason you're picking 4 is that the square root of 4 is a 2, so it gets to come out. The 6 stays in. That's what we call simplified radical form. So that is one thing where you're straight up going to simplify. This is where you have to rationalize. You don't need to know that word necessarily, but you have to remember the conjugate. And again, you don't have to know that word, but you have to know what it is and what to do. So if I'm now going to do this, I have to actually change the sign of that middle in order for these two to do what I need them to do, which is cancel out later. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. And then in this case, I'm going to be distributing this 3. So 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times root 3 is 3 root 3 because they don't actually intermingle. One's outside the root and one's inside. Now the bottom I'm going to FOIL, but when you do this, every time the radicals should go away. That's the idea of picking the conjugate. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times root 3 is a positive 2 times root 3. I'm expecting a negative 2 root 3 next. And that's what happens when I go to do the insides. This is negative. So 2 times negative root 3 becomes negative 2 root 3. And then I need to multiply this last part times this last part. So negative times a positive is negative. Root 3 times root 3 would technically be 9, and the square root of 9 would be 3. So keep in mind, we learned that the square root of a number times the square root of that same number is that number. So in this case, that'll just be a 3. It should happen like this every time. This O and I from FOIL should go away, and then these two numbers should combine. So in this particular problem, they combine to be a 1. And you could leave your answer like that, but because it's a 1, you can also just ignore it because we don't write every single thing in the universe over 1. We don't have that kind of time. But I would accept either of those answers. Here, I need to see the problem and go, oh, I'm going to distribute. Think about what you would do if there weren't radicals. The thing making this problem confusing is the square roots, so pretend they weren't there. If you had one thing on the outside and then 2 things in the parentheses, you would distribute. Math calls things what they are. So distributing is passing out. Like if I distribute papers, I'm passing them out to everybody. So that's basically what you're doing here. So I'm going to distribute or pass this out. So the 2 is going to multiply by nothing or times 1 because there's nothing out front. And then root 3 times root 3 is going to become root 9, but that's going to become a regular 3. So that first part becomes a regular 6. That's super weird. But okay, then here, 2 root 3 times 1 stays 2 root 3 because multiplying things by 1 doesn't change their value. So this, my friends, is my answer in simplified radical form. I don't get a decimal. I just leave it like that. Here you see these two and you should be thinking, okay, I'm going to need to FOIL. First means the first thing here times the first thing there. Outside means the outside terms, the very front and the very back end. 1 times root 6 is 1 root 6. I don't know why my pen's not working better. These two are going to become a negative 3 root 2. And then the last, be a little careful, I have a negative times a positive, which is negative. And since they're both underneath the square root, the 2 and the 6 go ahead and multiply and they become a 12. Here's where the FOILing problem can get tricky. you need to now look at these numbers under the radical, which this one's impossible to see. So I'll rewrite that. That was our root 6. And so now I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to look at each number and then check my yellow card. So I look at 6. 1 and 6, 2 or 3. No perfect squares. 2 doesn't break down. 12 does though. And if you look at your yellow card, 12 breaks into 4 times 3, and 4 is a perfect square, so it can come out. So the right answer has to have a 2 root 3, not a root 12. Now when I'm looking at these, I kind of feel like I want to, hang on, I have to see whether that was positive or negative. Feel like I want to be able to put them together, but I can't, because the thing you check for adding and subtracting is if they have the same number under the radical. 6, 2, 3, not the same. So I can't put them together. So that long thing is my answer. Okay. One thing that's not on here that is on the test is like an adding or subtracting. So let's pretend you had like, oh wait, maybe it's not on this part. Forget I said that. I think it's on the I part. Okay, solving. So these problems you're going to solve, it'll say on the test how to do it, but here you're going to solve by using the square root. And the way that I know that is, oh shoot. Yeah, the way that I know that is it has an x squared, but not a plain x. But on the test, it'll say solve using radicals or solve using square roots, so you'll know what to do. And what you need to do is you need to get the square part alone using just basic algebra, and then you do plus or minus the square root and finish solving. So here, the x squared is the only thing that's squared, so you have to get rid of the 3, and since it's multiplied in, you're going to divide that out. And so 108 divided by 3 puts me at 36. So I have this. So I come along now that it's alone and I square it using plus minus on my number side. These cancel. And this actually, when I go to my yellow card, is a perfect square. So I get plus or minus 6 and I'm done. I get like whole number answers. That happens sometimes. Okay, here, the squared part is just the x squared. So I have to get rid of the 5 and the 4. So think about math, like you've done this forever. To get rid of these problems, these numbers, you would get rid of the 4 first because it's the farthest away. Like the 5 is attached to it, so that's going to be the last thing that leaves. Because it's multiplied in, you're going to divide it out. X squared equals 2. So now I have the square part alone. It's time to put in the square root, plus or minus on the number side. Every time. Gone. And I get plus or minus root 2, because if I do that on my calculator, it's going to be a messy decimal. And if I look at my yellow card, 2 does not break down. So then that's my final simplified answer. This one looks a little bit more in depth, but it's not terrible. This is the squared part. This whole thing is squared. So I have to get that parenthesis part alone. So the only thing I'm trying to get rid of is the 3. The 3 is multiplied in. So I'm going to divide it out. Now I accomplished my goal. I have the squared part alone, and 81 divided by 3 is going to be 27. Now that the square part is alone, even though it's a big thing with parentheses, it's still the square part. I do my square root, and over here I do my square root with plus minus. Here the square and the root cancel, and I just have whatever was under the radical. And here you have to be careful. 27 is not a perfect square, but you do have to break it down. You'll always go to your yellow card and double check. And if you look at your yellow card, this splits into root 9 times the square root of 3, 9 times 3. But the square root of 9 is a regular 3. So this is what 27 gets simplified into. So I don't have the x alone yet. I have to take away 1 from this side. And then x is going to equal, and you can write this answer 2 ways. You can have your plus or minus 3 root 3 and then take the 1 away that you just moved over. Or you can have the negative 1 in front of that. That's how your math teachers are going to write it probably, but I don't care enough to be picky about that on the answer, like for the test. I mean, if you get that far, that's awesome, and we'll just call it good. You don't do any decimals. You don't put the 1 with them because they can't add or subtract since it doesn't have that square root with it. So you just leave it like that. Alrighty. Now you look at the directions. It says to write it in a plus bi form. So you have to start thinking about imaginary numbers. That's not the only thing we did. So the radical stuff that we were just working on, there was no I because we did plain radicals too. But here there's square roots of negatives. So keep in mind that anytime there's a square root of a negative, why is my pen not working? I might have to stop and charge this bad boy for a little bit. I know you're sad. Don't worry. I'll come back.